Medieval warfare was not just a contest of kings and knights. It was a pervasive, brutal force that shaped the lives of everyone from nobles to peasants. Unlike the sanitized battles often portrayed in modern media, medieval war was chaotic, unpredictable, and terrifying. Fields became mud-soaked killing grounds, towns transformed into burned ruins, and ordinary people were caught in the crossfire of forces far larger than themselves. The brutality of medieval warfare was rooted not only in the weaponry of the time, but also in the social, political, and economic structures that demanded constant conflict. The soldier of the medieval era was a figure forged in hardship long before stepping onto the battlefield. Knights, often romanticized as gallant warriors, were trained rigorously from childhood in martial arts, horsemanship, and strategy. Their armor, while impressive, was heavy and exhausting to wear. A full suit of plate armor could weigh over 50 pounds, limiting mobility and causing fatigue during long campaigns. Beneath the romantic veneer, knights were not immune to the fear and pain of battle. They faced sword blows, arrows, and lances, with the knowledge that a single misstep could lead to a gruesome death. Mercenaries, on the other hand, were soldiers of fortune. Hired by lords or kings, they often fought for pay rather than loyalty, making them both feared and distrusted. Mercenary bands could be highly effective on the battlefield, but they were notorious for brutal reprisals against civilian populations. Villages caught in the path of an army could be looted, burned, or worse. For peasants, the presence of soldiers, even those not actively at war, was a constant threat. Survival often meant hiding, fleeing, or offering what little they had to avoid violence. Unlike the professional knights and mercenaries, ordinary peasants were often pressed into service or forced to defend their homes with rudimentary weapons. Pitchforks, farming tools, and makeshift shields were no match for professional armor and trained soldiers, leaving peasant levies vulnerable to slaughter. Many medieval armies relied on these conscripts, who were poorly equipped, poorly trained, and frequently sacrificed as cannon fodder. Their deaths were not seen as particularly tragic in contemporary accounts. They were the expendable mass that allowed lords and kings to wage war without risking their elite forces. One of the most feared aspects of medieval warfare was siege warfare, a prolonged and grueling form of combat that tested the endurance of both soldiers and civilians. Castles and walled cities could hold out for months, sometimes years, under attack. Sieges involved starvation, disease, and psychological torment. Attackers used siege engines, such as trebuchets and battering rams, to breach walls, while defenders relied on boiling oil, arrows, and counter-siege tactics. Civilians trapped inside fortifications often suffered as much, if not more, than the soldiers. Starvation and disease could decimate populations before the walls were even breached, and surrender often led to massacres or forced enslavement. The weapons of medieval warfare added a visceral horror to the battlefield. Longbows, crossbows, and early firearms could kill from a distance, while swords, axes, and maces delivered close-range brutality. The force of a mace crushing bone or a sword slicing through flesh left marks not only on the body, but on the psyche of survivors. Battles were rarely quick. They were prolonged contests of stamina, strategy, and sheer will. The noise alone, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the roar of horses, was enough to unnerve even seasoned warriors. Medical care on the battlefield was rudimentary at best. Soldiers who survived initial injuries often succumbed to infection, gangrene, or exposure. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, and cauterization was common for controlling bleeding. Disease spread quickly in army camps due to poor sanitation and close quarters, sometimes claiming more lives than combat itself. For peasants caught in war, medical care was even more limited. A broken bone or infected wound could mean certain death in the weeks following a battle. The psychological toll of medieval warfare was immense. Chronic fear, grief, and trauma affected soldiers and civilians alike. Survivors of battles often reported nightmares and panic, experiences now recognized as post-traumatic stress. The randomness of death, where a powerful blow or stray arrow could strike anyone, created an environment of constant terror. For communities, the sight of a returning army often meant imminent danger, looting, and death, rather than relief or protection. Medieval warfare was also closely tied to social hierarchy and political ambition. Kings, princes, and nobles waged wars to expand territory, assert dominance, or resolve disputes. Religious conflicts, such as the Crusades, added an ideological justification for killing, often blurring the lines between military necessity and sanctioned slaughter. The consequences for ordinary people, however, were largely ignored. The death tolls were staggering, and the devastation to crops, homes, and infrastructure could take decades to recover from. Civilians were frequently the silent victims of medieval battles. Armies would burn crops to starve enemy forces, leaving the local population to suffer famine. Villages were plundered, and sometimes entire communities were wiped out as a warning to others. Survivors might be enslaved, forced to serve the victor, or left destitute. For many peasants, life became a constant negotiation between survival and submission, and the horrors of war extended far beyond the battlefield. The unpredictability of medieval warfare meant that even successful soldiers lived with uncertainty. Victory did not guarantee safety. Armies could turn on their own in mutiny or pillage, especially mercenary forces seeking pay. Looting and disorder were common, and allegiances could shift rapidly. A soldier might fight one day for a king and be attacked the next by former allies. This instability created a climate of fear and reinforced the brutal nature of war. Religious and moral justifications were often used to rationalize the savagery of medieval combat. Crusaders, for instance, believed they were fighting holy wars, granting themselves moral immunity for acts of extreme violence. Similarly, armies invoked divine favor to justify pillage and massacre. These beliefs provided a framework for the unthinkable, embedding brutality within a socially accepted narrative that allowed atrocities to continue unchecked. Even in times of relative peace, the threat of warfare shaped daily life. Towns built defensive walls, villages practiced watch routines, and peasants stored food for potential sieges. Children grew up learning about the horrors of battle, and entire generations were conditioned to anticipate violence. Warfare was a constant backdrop to medieval society, influencing law, economy, culture, and psychology. Despite the terror, medieval warfare also demanded extraordinary resilience and courage. Soldiers endured extreme conditions, harsh discipline, and relentless campaigns. Peasants and townspeople developed strategies to survive, from fleeing to hiding, bartering with invading forces, or fortifying their homes. Communities learned to adapt to cycles of violence, finding ways to endure and rebuild after devastation. The human capacity to survive amidst such relentless brutality is a testament to resilience, even as the suffering remained profound. The legacy of medieval warfare is still visible today, not just in historical records or literature, but in the physical remnants of castles, fortifications, and battlefields. Archaeological evidence, skeletons with healed injuries, mass graves, and weapon fragments, tells a story of extreme suffering and endurance. Chronicles and letters from the period provide personal perspectives, detailing fear, despair, and courage in the face of violence. These sources offer a window into the harsh reality that textbooks and modern depictions often romanticize. In conclusion, the brutality of medieval warfare extended far beyond the clash of swords. It was a complex system of violence shaped by technology, social hierarchy, political ambition, and ideology. Soldiers, mercenaries, and peasants all endured immense hardship, though their experiences varied widely. Armies inflicted terror on civilians as much as they fought opposing forces. Starvation, disease, psychological trauma, and death were constant companions. Yet within this horror, human resilience shone through. Communities rebuilt, soldiers endured, and ordinary people survived against overwhelming odds. Medieval warfare was not just a historical phenomenon. It was a force that molded society, leaving scars both physical and psychological that would echo for generations.